Demonology and Devil Lore, Volume 1, Part 1, Demonology, Chapter 4, The Abgot, the ex-god, deities demonized by conquest, theological animosity, illustration from the Avesta, devil worship and arrested deism, Sheikh Adi, why demons were painted ugly, survivals of their beauty. The phenomena of the transformation of deities into demons met the student of demonology at every step. We shall have to consider many examples of a kind similar to those which have been mentioned in the preceding chapter, but it is necessary to present at this stage of our inquiry a sufficient number of examples to establish the fact that in every country forces have been at work to degrade the primitive gods into types of evil, as preliminary to a consideration of the nature of those forces. We find the history of the phenomena suggested in the German word for idol, Abgott, ex-god. Then we have pagan, villager, and heathen, of the hearth, denoting those who stood by their old gods after others had transferred their faith to the new. These words bring us to consider the influence upon religious conceptions of the struggles which have occurred between the races and nations, and consequently between their religions. It must be borne in mind that by the time any tribes had gathered to the consistency of a nation, one of the strongest forces of its coherence would be its priesthood. So soon as it became a general belief that there were in the universe good and evil powers, there must arise a popular demand for the means of obtaining their favor, and this demand has never failed to obtain a supply of priesthoods, claiming to bind or influence preternatural beings. These priesthoods represent the strongest motives and fears of a people, and they were gradually entrenched in great institutions involving powerful interests. Every invasion or collision or mingling of races thus brought their respective religions into contact and rivalry. And as no priesthood has been known to consent peaceably to its own downfall and the degradation of its own deities, we need not wonder that there have been perpetual wars for religious ascendancy. It is not unusual to hear sects among ourselves accusing each other of idolatry. In earlier times, the rule was for each religion to denounce its opponent's gods as devils. Gregory the Great wrote to his missionary in Britain, the Abbot Mellitus, second Bishop of Canterbury, that whereas the people were accustomed to sacrifice many oxen in honor of demons, let them celebrate a religious and solemn festival, and not slay the animals to the devil, Diablo, but to be eaten by themselves to the glory of God. Thus, the devotion of meats to those deities of our ancestors, which the Pope denounces demons, which took place chiefly at Yuletide, has survived in our more comfortable Christmas banquets. This was the fact of all the deities which Christianity overtook to surpass. But it had been the habit of religions for many ages before. They never denied the actual existence of the deities they were engaged in suppressing. That would have been too great an outrage upon popular beliefs, and might have caused a reaction, and besides, each new religion had an interest of its own in preserving the basis of belief in these indivisible beings. Disbelief in the very existence of the old gods might be followed by a skeptical spirit that might endanger the new. So the propagandists maintained the existence of native gods, but called them devils. Sometimes wars or intercourse between tribes led to their fusion. The battle between opposing religions was drawn, in which case there would be a compromise by which several deities of different origin might continue together in the same race and receive equal homage. The differing degrees of importance ascribed to the separate persons of the Hindu triad in various locations of India. The differing degrees of importance ascribed to the separate persons of the Hindu triad in various localities of India suggest it as quite probable that Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva signaled in their union the political unity of certain districts in their country. The blending of the names of Confucius and Buddha in many Chinese and Japanese temples may show us an analogous process now going on, and indeed the various ethical ideas combined in the Christian Trinity render the fact stated one of easy interpretation. But the religious difficulty was sometimes not susceptible of compromise. The most powerful priesthood carried the day, and they used every ingenuity to degrade the gods of their opponents. Agatha demons were turned into cacodemons. The serpent, worshipped in many lands, might be adopted as the source of sleeping Vishnu in India, might be associated with the rainbow, the heavenly serpent in Persia, but elsewhere was cursed as the very genius of evil. The operation of this force in the degradation of deities is particularly revealed in the sacred books of Persia. In that country, the great religions of the East would appear to have contended against each other with especial fury, and their struggles were probably instrumental in causing one or more of the early migrations into Western Europe. The great celestial war between Ormuzd and Ahriman, light and darkness, corresponded with a violent theological conflict, one result of which is that the word deva, meaning deity, to Brahmins means devil, to Parsis. The following extract from the Zend Avesta will serve as an example of the spirit in which the war was waged. All your devas are only manifold children of the evil mind, and the great one who worships the Saoma of lies and deceits, besides the treacherous acts for which you are notorious throughout the 7 regions of the earth. You have invented all the evil which men speak and do, which is indeed pleasant to the devas, but is devoid of all goodness, and therefore perishes before the insight of the truth of the wise. Thus you defraud men of their good minds and of their immortality by your evil minds, as well through those of the devas as that of the evil spirit, through evil deeds and evil words, whereby the power of liars grows. That is to say, ours is the true God, your God is the devil. The Zoroastrian conversion of devas, des, into devil, does not alone represent the work of this odium theologicum. In the early hymns of India, the appellation asuras is given to the gods. Asura means a spirit, but in the process of time, asura, like demon, came to have a sinister meaning. The gods were called suras, the demons asuras, and these were said to contend together. But in Persia, the asuras, demonized in India, retained their divinity, and gave the name Ahura to the supreme deity, Ormuzd Ahura Mazda. On the other hand, as Mr. Muri supposes, Varinya applied an evil spirit of the darkness in the Zendavesta is congate with Varuna, heaven, and the Vedic Indra, king of the gods. The sun is named in the Zoroastrian religion as one of the chief counselors of that prince of darkness. But in every country conquered by a new religion, there will always be found some, as we have seen, who will hold on to the old deity under all his changed fortunes. These will be called bigots, but still they will adhere to the ancient belief and practice the old rites, sometimes even after they have had to yield to the popular terminology and call the old god a devil. They will find some reason of continuing the transmitted forms. It is probable that to this cause was originally due the religions which had been developed into what is now termed devil worship. The distinct and avowed worship of the evil power in preference to the good is a rather startling phenomenon when presented baldly. As, for example, in a prayer of the meditations to Nayan, author of Evil, quoted by Dr. Reveal, O Zamhor, to thee we offer no prayers. The good God needs no asking, but we must pray to Nayan. Nayan must be appeased. O Nayan, bad and strong spirit, let not the thunder roar over our heads. Tell the seed to keep within its bounds. Spare, O Nayan, the ripening fruit, and dry not up the blossoming rice. Let not our women bring forth children on the accursed days. Thou reignest, and this thou knowest, over the wicked, and great is their number. O Nayan, torment not, then, any longer the good folk. This is natural and suggestive of the criminal under sentence of death, who, when asked if he was not afraid to meet his God, replied, Not in the least. It's that other party I'm afraid of. Yet it is hardly doubtful that the worship of Nayan began in the era when he was by no means considered morally baser than Zamhor. How the theory of dualism, when attained, might produce the phenomenon called devil worship is illustrated in the case of the Yazidis, now so notorious for their species of religion. Their theory is usually supposed to be entirely represented by the expression uttered by one of them. Will not Satan, then, reward the poor Yazidis, who alone have never spoken ill of him and have suffered so much for him? But these words are significant, no doubt, of the underlying fact. They have never spoken ill of the Satan they worship. The Muslim calls the Yazidi a Satan worshipper only as the early Zoroastrian held the worshipper of the Deva to be the same. The chief object of worship among the Yazidis is the figure of the bird Toas, a half-mythical peacock. Professor Keene of Cambridge traces the Taos of this Assyrian sect to the sacred bird called a phoenix, whose picture, as seen by Herodotus in Egypt, is described by him as very like an eagle in outline and in size, but with plumage partly gold-colored, partly crimson, and which was said to return to Heliopolis every 500 years, there to burn itself on the altar of the sun, that another might rise from its ashes. Now the name Yazidis is simply Ezed's genie, and we are thus appointed to Arabia, where we find the belief in genii is strongest, and also associated with the mythical bird Roc and its folklore. There we find Muhammad rebuking the popular belief in a certain bird called Hama, which was said to take form from the blood near the brain of a dead person and fly away, to return, however, at the end of every 100 years to visit the person's sepulchre. But this is by no means devil worship, nor can we find any trace of that in the most sacred scripture of the Yazidis, the eulogy of Sheikh eulogy of Sheikh Adi. The Sheikh inherited from his father Musafir the sanctity of an incarnation of the divine essence, of which he, Adi, speaks as the all-merciful. By his light he hath lighted the lamp of the morning. I am he that placed Adam in my paradise. I am he that made Nimrod a hot burning fire. I am he that guided Amet, mine elect. I gifted him with my way and guidance. Mine are all existences together. They are my gift and under my direction. I am he that possesseth all majesty, and benevolence and charity are from my grace. I am he that entereth the heart in my zeal, and I shine through the power of my awfulness and majesty. I am he to whom the lion of the desert came. I rebuke him, and he became like stone. I am he to whom the serpent came, and by my will I made him like dust. I am he that shook the rock and made it tremble, and sweet water flowed therefrom from every side. The reverence shown in these sacred sentences for Hebrew names and traditions, as of Adam in paradise, Mara and the smitten rock, and for Ahmet, Mohammed, appears to have had its own requital in the odious designation of the worshippers of Taus as devil worshippers, a label which the Yazidis perhaps accepted as the Wesleyans and Friends accepted such names as Methodists and Quakers. Mohammed has expiated the many deities he degraded to devils by being himself turned to an idol, Mahomet, a term of contempt all the more popular for its resemblance to mummery. Despite his denunciations of idolatry, it is certain that this earlier religion represented by the Yazidis has never been entirely suppressed, even among his own followers. In Dr. Leitner's interesting collection, there is a lamp, which he obtained from a mosque, made in the shape of a peacock, and this is but one of many similar relics of primitive or alien symbolism found among the Muslim tribes. The evolution of demons and devils out of deities was made real to the popular imagination in every country where the new religion found art existing. By alliance with it, was enabled to shape the ideas of the people. The theoretical degradation of deities of previously fair association could only be completed where they were presented to the eye in repulsive forms. It will readily occur to every one that a rationally conceived demon or devil would not be repulsive. If it were a demon that men wish to represent, mere euphemism would prevent its being rendered odious. The main characteristic of a demon, that which distinguishes it from a devil, is, as we have seen, that it has a real and human-like motive for whatever evil it causes. If it afflict or consume man, it is not for mere malignancy, but because impelled by the pains of hunger, lust, or other suffering, like the famished wolf or shark. And if sacrifices of food were offered to satisfy its need, equally we might expect that no unnecessary insult would be offered in the attempt to betray it. But if it were a devil, a being actuated by simple malevolence, one of its essential functions, temptation, would be destroyed by hideousness. For the work of seduction, we might expect a devil to wear the form of an angel of light, but by no means to approach this intended victim in any horrible shape, such as would repel every mortal. The great representations of evil, whether imagined by the speculative or the religious sense, have never been originally ugly. The gods might be described as falling swiftly like lightning out of heaven, but in the popular imagination they retained for a long time much of their splendor. The very ingenuity with which they were afterwards invested with ugliness in religious art attests that there were certain popular sentiments about them which had to be distinctly reserved. It was because they were thought beautiful that they must be painted ugly. It was because they were, even among converts to the new religion, still secretly believed to be kind and helpful, that there was employed such elaboration of hideous designs to deform them. The pictorial representations of demons and devils will come under a more detailed examination hereafter. It is for the present sufficient to point out that the traditional blackness or ugliness of demons and devils, as now thought of, by no means militates against the fact that they were once the popular deities. The contrast, for instance, between the horrible physiognomy given to Satan in ordinary Christian art and the theological representation of him as the tempter is obvious. Had the design of art been to represent the theological theory, Satan would have been portrayed in a fascinating form. But the design was not that. It was to arouse horror and antipathy for the native deities to which the ignorant clung tenaciously. It was to train children to think of the still secretly worshipped idols as frightful and bestial beings. It is important, therefore, that we should guard against confusing the speculative or the moral attempts of mankind to personify pain and evil with the ugly and brutal demons and devils of artificial superstition, oftenest pictured on church walls. Sometimes they are set to support water spouts, often the brackets that hold their foes, the saints. It is a very ancient device. Our figure, too, from the handle of a chalice in possession of Sir James Hooker, meant probably to hold the holy water of Ganges. These are not genuine demons or devils, but carefully caricatured deities. Who that looks upon the grinning bestial forms carved about the roof of any old church, as those on Melrose Abbey and York Cathedral, which there is reason to believe, represent the primitive deities driven from the interior by potency of holy water, and chained to the uncongenial service of supporting the roof gutter, can see in these gargoyles anything but carved imprecations. Was it to such ugly beings, guardians of their streams, hills, and forests, that our ancestors consecrated the holly and mistletoe, or was such that they associated their flowers, fruits, and homes? They were caricatures inspired by missionaries, made to repel and disgust, as the images of saints beside them were carved in beauty to attract. If the pagans had been the artists, the good looks would have been on the other side, and indeed, there was an art of which those pagans were the unconscious possessors, through which the true characters of the imaginary beings they adorned have been transmitted to us. In the fables of their folklore, we find the fairies that represent the spirit of the gods and goddesses, to which they are easily traceable. That goddess, who in Christian times was pictured as a hag riding on a broomstick, was Frigga, the Earth Mother, associated with the first sacred affections clustering around the hearth, or Freya, whose very name was consecrated to Frau, woman and wife. The mantle of Bertha did not cover more tenderness when it fell to the shoulders of Mary. The German child's name for the pre-Christian Madonna was Mother Rose. Distaff in hand, she watched over the industrious at their household work. She hovered near the cottage, perhaps to find there some weeping Cinderella, and give her beauty for ashes.